From Los Angeles, the home of film and television, this is Film Music Live, a webcast featuring outstanding composers, orchestrators, filmmakers, and more from the world of music for film, television, and video games, talking about their work and answering your questions. Film Music Live is sponsored by the Film Music Network and Film Music Institute. And now the host of Film Music Live, Daniel Schweiger.
Hey everyone, I'm Daniel Schweiger, and welcome to Film Music Live, the show where you get to ask the questions to today's top composers. I'm happy to have you here. Starting off himself as a fantastical friendly composer who more than fulfilled his screen promise in far more genres than horror and science fiction, Marco Beltrami has pulled many talented young musicians to help harness the music that comes out of his mind before developing their own strong voice. One quick study is Brandon Roberts, an already skilled orchestrator and composer whose talents would join Beltrami's team in such early collaborations as V, Scream 4, The Thing, and Woman in Black. Over the ensuing decade, Roberts has received co-composing billing with Beltrami on such thrilling scores as The Woman in Black 2, Angel of Death, Little Evil, Underwater, and their Emmy-winning Free Solo, all the while striking out on his own with Motherland, Fort Salem, The Twilight Zone, and Black Box. But when it comes to any composing collaboration, the best ones seamlessly fuse the musicians' unique voices into a scoring whole, which makes Marco Beltrami and Brandon Roberts teaming on Chaos Walking all the more singularly distinctive, as the film is set in a backwards human space colony where thoughts literally become a colorful form called the noise. Realized by Doug Liman, the Bourne Identity and Edge of Tomorrow's master of the cinematic chase, Chaos Walking has a stranded female space traveler being stalked by toxic masculinity, with every villainous psychic voice shouting for her capture. Her one salvation is a colonist who's never seen or heard a woman before and must take her on a perilous voyage of discovery. Giving the challenging task of fusing their musical abilities to make the score heard over both voice and visual effects, Beltrami and Roberts inventively joined the scoring genres of strumming western, ethnic exoticism, rock and roll fury, and the symphonic adventure in a way that draws on their previous collaborations like Logan, The Homesman, and Gods of Egypt, all while tackling the idea of sound itself from their work on Two Quiet Place films. The result is a score that's anything but sonic, as Beltrami and Roberts have composed a stylistically thrilling and seamlessly gritty score that's one of their most unique creations. And now let's welcome a composing team who can definitely read each other's minds. Marco Beltrami and Brandon Roberts. Welcome to Film Music Live.
Good to be here, Dan. Thanks. Hey, Brandon.
Hey, guys.
Hey, great to see you. Laptop adjust. So, Marco, you worked with some incredibly talented composers who, risen through the ranks to get co-scoring credit. What attracted you to Brandon Roberts' work? And Brandon, how did you come into Marco's orbit?
Well, let's see. I started to know about Brandon through another friend of ours, Marcus Trump, who I've collaborated with, and Brandon was a good friend of Marcus's and recommended him. And it's funny, you come across a lot of people in this business that you could possibly work with, but it's very few that you really click and feel like you're on the same page and share an aesthetic and creative mind for this. And with Brandon, it's one of those seamless things where it just really clicked. And I don't know how many years ago it was, maybe 10 years, Brandon.
I think we're actually past a decade at this point. I think we're going on like 11 or 12.
Wow. Okay. The time goes fast.
Well, yes and no. No. I would concur with Marco on this. Is I think our tastes are similar. Like I can't write like him, and he can write me under the table. But I think the taste is similar. So he can write something that I'm like, oh, that's so cool. I can't do that, but that's really cool. And then yeah,
Well, that's actually not true. I think Brandon writes me under the table, but it's been fun. Like, a project like Free Solo, where we're both working on ideas, and in the end, it becomes a seamless score. So it's I think to have that kind of relationship is sort of rare.
Yeah, I agree. And I think, with the note of any good collaboration, again, is that you really can't tell who wrote what, but yet the music has maybe your own little individualistic touches. What do you think, again, is the secret to that kind of seamless collaboration that you've obviously mastered?
The secret is, well, you have to be able to stir risotto well.
Yeah.
No, I don't know. What's the secret, Brandon?
The secret is you get the people when they have very little money, they have no other job prospects, and then you say, "Here's what you need to do," and then you throw them in a room. No, in all honesty, in seriousness, like going back to V, which is like our first project we kind of worked together on, was on some level, I think there's autonomy that Marco gave me from the beginning. So like he'll say, "Hey, here's the thematic idea," or here's kind of what I was thinking, and here's some sounds that I created or Buck Sanders created, or that are kind of part of the palette. And then on some level beyond that, there's autonomy, cue to cue, and add new elements if you want. So I think it's very rewarding experience being the person kind of working for him, especially at the beginning where it was just a pleasure. So like V, I felt like it was,
as opposed to now.
Yeah, no. Now is a different story. No, but I think the autonomy goes a long way in making you feel like you still have your voice heard, or at least you're contributing in a way that feels like you're still. It feels like you're actually satisfying your artistic urges, or whatever you would call it, And but again, I think that only works if the stuff you're coming up with, if you guys share taste. Because if you don't, then you're just going to be butting heads, I think.
Yeah.
Now, V, man, I wish they had a resolution to that show. I actually quite enjoyed the reboot of the series. I mean, I think there tends to be like a common question, from upcoming composers to, people like yourself, Brandon, who have, been able to get to this point, is what is the secret of any, composer, additional composer, orchestrator, whatnot, working under another, bigger composer to get into that point? What would you tell them?
Well, first off, I think it's changed completely from when I first started. So when I first started, you had, a crop of A and B list composers that got most of the Hollywood gigs. And if you got in with some of those guys, whoever they were, it was kind of a natural progression that you might start to get some of the gigs that they're, lower on the totem pole, so to speak. I think now stuff has changed where there's a whole nother crop of young composers that have very few credits and have worked on very few things that are getting big gigs, mainly because the studios are open to it now, and the directors are into, oh wow, that's a cool new voice. And so on some level, I think the paradigm of what it was when I started has completely changed. And
well, it's also the whole paradigm of filmmaking has changed.
Yeah.
Like, it's so much easier to make films with the technology platforms and everything that's available, that you don't need to have, a full setup. It can be a lot different than, when you're writing pencil and paper, like when I started.
Yeah.
It's interesting, when you look at A Quiet Place, where literally if you make a sound, you will die, to Underwater, where if you make a sound underwater, you will die, is that, and now in this movie where you have literally people listening to each other's thoughts, where if they think something, they could get killed. And on top of that, you have, the noise, which is this really cool visual effect, is that it really seems to be that you are dealing with movies and scoring plots that revolve around the idea of sound.
I think one thing that we do really well, especially with the person that's not here but who contributes to all the projects in different ways, from producing things to making sounds to even co-scoring, also is Buck Sanders, who works in the studio here with me, is that a lot of these films, I think what we do well is embrace the sound world and find that fine line between what is sound and what is music, and sort of play with that idea, and don't limit to just traditional orchestrational musical events. So I think that in all those movies that you mentioned, there was an opportunity to play with this idea, this barrier of sound and music, and I think that leads to some really interesting developments that we're able to make.
Yeah, and I can imagine in the case of Chaos Walking, it's such an unusual score that straddles so many different genres. You've got Westerns, you've got tribal, you've got sci-fi synths. And again, it just struck me just how many kind of playing fields this movie is taking place in.
Yeah. Well, and to give an example of that, like, one of the things that we talked about when we were releasing the CD on this was some of the sounds that we used in this movie, and some of the sources for those sounds. Like, we often try to start with acoustical sources, such as in this, there's a prominent wind wand, which filtered and processed and became an important sound for it. But this palette is something that we talk about almost as if you talk about the instruments that you're going to use to score. It's just as important as the having two oboes and a horn.
Yeah, I think too, knowing when it comes to sound, knowing when to pick your battles, because that was something I think I learned early on, but it was a significant lesson, was don't try to double up on the sound. If, for example, in Chaos Walking, even when Marco and I first went to the first screening, when they screened it for us, it was almost like static, almost like digital static. And so one of our first conversations was about staying out of those frequency ranges. So we did, like, going back to your comment, Dan, was one of the reasons we actually arrived at these low pulsing drums, was because that was a frequency that wasn't taken up. And whereas if you're doubling up on some of those sounds, you tick off the entire sound team, you wind up obscuring the score, where you can't, it just becomes cacophony. And so I think, to Marco's point about the palette, that discussion was right at the beginning, and it actually stemmed from how do we stay out of the way of the noise, which is clearly going to be a part of the whole film.
When we started on the project, we didn't know exactly what shape the noise was going to take, because it was still early on, and that was really a conceptual thing that they hadn't ironed out. But we knew it was going to be prominent no matter what it was. So it's one of those things that was part of our practical thing that became very much a part of the creative discussion right from the start.
I mean, I can only imagine that the Western guitar idea came naturally because, again, they're riding horses, and again, the movie looks like it could take place in the Old West if it wasn't for the spaceships and the aliens, hanging around the planet.
Yeah, I mean, there was definitely a process. I mean, our original thought was to use guitars and process them and it has a Western look to it, and to capture that, Doug wasn't totally keen on going with the guitar thing right at first, so we explored other avenues. It was a bit of an exploration on this movie, because it was hard to know exactly what it was at first.
And, I guess in the process for quite a while, how did it change?
One of the things that I remember we came up with it early on was we had thought, since women are not really present in the society, it might be cool to use have the female voice be a big part of the score. And since Marco secretly harbors a desire to turn every film into a Western, even if it's a romantic comedy, we thought, oh, this is like a perfect opportunity to use a female voice, in the style of Morricone even. I mean, maybe not quite as literal, but make it, even if it was disguised electronically or just done in interesting ways. And so that was like our first maybe misfire, where we thought that was such a good idea, and it took very little time for that to not be a good idea.
Yeah, I mean, we were actually thinking about what was it? Those some of those Appalachian choirs we were thinking of using.
Right. Yeah, we were gonna do. Yeah, we had this idea of using. I forget what the style of singing is, but where they all basically sit in quadrants facing each other, and it's and basically, I remember after that meeting, Marco is like, "Yeah, I don't think we're gonna do that." it was. I'll just.
It was a great idea. It really was a great idea, but
it's a great idea that
never gonna fly.
Will show up on a romantic comedy, but not on this film.
Yeah.
What was the experience of working with Doug Liman like?
I mean, he's like a genius with his thoughts and his process and everything. Sometimes on a day-to-day level, it could get in the way a little bit in terms of not really understanding. Going around sometimes a few times to end back where you started, but I mean, he's amazingly intelligent, and I love talking to him, and he was really inspiring. His whole notion of just hearing his take on what he was thinking about in these scenes, and how his brain works was really amazing. Even if it did make our job a little difficult sometimes.
Once he landed on something he liked, he stuck with it. Like that was, there could be the feeling of, oh, I don't know if we're gonna pull off what he wants, because there was a lot of early rejections. But then once he heard something he liked, he stayed with it. So he wasn't insatiable. He just until he heard what he wanted. Yeah,
early on we nailed like the bad guy stuff, the mayor's theme, and this
ones and the percussion, and yeah,
and he was really excited about that, and he knew it right away when he heard that. I think it was right in the beginning of the movie. In fact, one of the first things we played him, and then we went through a long dry spell after that,
right,
where we couldn't get anything else past him. But eventually we cracked the puzzle.
Now, a big puzzle obviously was that you, I guess you scored a whole bunch of this during the lockdown. How did that work?
Well, we started. When did we start? It was way before the lockdown, right?
Yeah. I want to say we started in June the year before, but we didn't score it in. So that would have been 19. I mean, wrong century or wrong century. What? That would have been
2019. But
2019. Thank you.
Yeah, but and so we actually had a lot of creative discussions, in that time before COVID. We had meetings here. We had meetings at Lionsgate. We had a lot of discussions with him and his amazing picture editor, Doc, who really took on the project towards the end, and guided the ship after he left the film, after Doug left the film. So and he was amazing. But yeah, we didn't record the score until well into COVID, which was maybe in June of 2020, and we had to do that all remote. It was, it's not this that whole year is it's tough to do that. I know people do it and all, but it's such an unmusical way to work.
I can imagine.
It was also an awkward time too, because I think that was when we did it was right at the height of it, and you also worry about the musicians too, and so there was restrictions about how many people can be in the room, so you also have to deal with reduced forces. So we did stuff with smaller string sections than maybe we normally would have. We definitely had things split out, so the brass was done at a separate time than the strings, and so it was you don't get that moment that we all love and directors all love, where they get to be at the scoring stage and like hear their theme played by an orchestra. That's like the juice for so many directors. And that's the only other than the logistical difficulties, that's the one thing that it was kind of sad to lose from doing it remotely. But obviously everyone had to do what they had to do. So,
well, now I'd love to get into some of our audience questions, and we've got one from Louis Virtullini. Hey, Marco and Brandon, I'm a big fan of the scores to 310 to Yuma, The Omen, Scream, The Thing, and countless others. My question is, when doing scores for remakes or reboots of movies, do you go back and rewatch the original movies for ideas or inspiration? And if you do, which composers inspire you when you're maybe recreating or carrying on their work?
Yeah, we have done quite a few reboots and remakes. Sometimes I'm aware of the first score. How could I not be aware of Jerry Goldsmith's score to The Omen, which was something I studied and was really so nervous about. Had such anxiety about doing the remake because he did such a masterful job of writing a score that basically can be condensed down to 3 notes, and everything stems from that. And so how do I do that? So, but in many other instances, we didn't really pay attention, either because of direct direction from the director saying we don't want the score to be like past, like in the Die Hard movies, in 310 to Yuma. Even in Terminator, which I got a lot of hate mail for, by the way, because people wanted it to be the use of the original theme. So, in cases like that, often I'll do some sort of homage to the original score. In Die Hard, I did that. In Terminator, I did. So, it's definitely an individual project by project. It's not an overall thing. In the Twilight Zone, we actually used the main theme for that, and we made some adaptations to it. But what else, Brandon?
No, I think that's right. I mean, there's like the Twilight Zone. We were from moment one. They wanted the spirit of the original. Whereas, like you said, there's projects where it's avoided at all cost. We want a new feel. Most of the time, I find going back to the old scores is depressing because they're so good. But you learn something and you take what you can from it and hopefully apply some aspect of that without obviously, copying it, but just some element that you're taking from it. And generally it's the scores back then, man, the creative courage they had, and it was just wonderful. Twilight Zone, definitely.
Yeah, in Twilight Zone, actually, Brandon was really diligent about studying the old scores and creating the world that was was, very modern, but also sort of retro, and did justice to the old scores. I think those are really great examples of being influenced by the original, but doing something new.
Now I've got a question from Don and Joan Lackluster. Hey Marco, consider me a fan since iRobot, which was a masterpiece and still is. In the past 10 years, your style changed quite a bit, starting with Soul Surfer. Do you, the composer, realize your music has gone through a change over the years?
I guess I'm not totally aware of it, but I know that the music definitely does evolve. I was just listening to, actually doing a project now, which is all temped with Scream, actually. And to go back and hear those scores and hear what I did then, what I did now, would do now, it's, it definitely has evolved. Little by little, it's sort of, you don't really notice all the changes, sort of like kids, I guess, growing up. You don't notice as they, do things, and then all of a sudden they're grown up. But yeah.
Now, Dale would love to know, can you discuss your fascination with organic sound sources, cactus plants, jawbones, artillery shells, and wind, and the way you process and utilize them in your scores? And I guess here we're particularly talking about The Homesman.
Well, The Homesman, and then also Woman in Black, where, one of the things that Brandon did was actually Buck got these World War II artillery shells and used them as percussive sounds in the score. And the impetus for all this stuff is, doing something organic to the film. Whether it was in World War Z, where the zombies communicated by gnashing their teeth, and then we found these javelina skulls that the javelinas are these feral pigs in the Southwest that communicate by gnashing their teeth. So we thought that would be a neat percussion instrument. So things like that, things that that are applicable to the score.
Now, Brandon, you just had a score for a Blumhouse film come out through Lakeshore. Tell us about it.
So the movie's called Black Box, and it's part of this like Blumhouse horror series they did, and with Amazon, and it's really cool. They basically picked a different composer for each film, different director, etc. And it was. Talk about organic sources too. It was a lot of manipulated voices, a lot of odd panning. It was done, but it was great. It was project was fun. Young filmmaker, absolutely. Emmanuel, this guy's gonna do just fine. And I think this is his first feature, and it's just mind-boggling. It's frightening, like what young people are doing. It's humbling and inspiring, but very humbling at the same time.
I mean, and also I'd be remiss to not mention Fort Salem. I don't know if there's going to be another season of it, but what was that whole process like?
I'm actually working on season 2 right now, so that's going well. I can't give plot elements away, but music-wise, it's been a blast, and I think it's another project where they have a lot of musical courage, for lack of a better term. So pretty much anything I want to try, they're down for. And I uses a ton of vocal effects as well, and a lot of cello. But hopefully there will be a season 2 score as well, because there's some fun scenes.
I mean, how did you want to convey a futuristic witch? To draw on essentially the sounds that would say witch score and update them into a television series like this.
Well, to be honest, it was okay. I would say this: working with Marco's taught me one thing that only one, by the way, nothing else. Just one thing that has been incredibly valuable, which is, and I think even back in my days working with Bear McCreary, he would do something similar, and I think it's absolutely the right way to approach a film score, and especially a long form television show. And that's create a musical world, which includes themes, but it also includes the sound palette. It also includes the overall vibe that can stem from things you've learned from the history, from the script, from anything. And so in the case of Motherland, since the magic is very grounded in audio, in other words, like their vocal cords and manipulating sound, then I did a lot of stuff with manipulating the female voice and trying to make music out of it. So I think on some level it is similar to Chaos Walking approach, where you look at what it needs, what is going to conflict sound wise, and you start kind of piecing together things that you think might work. So yeah, it's a whole lot of trial and error and a whole lot of missteps. Like I have as much stuff I've thrown out as I've used easily.
Now, on that note, we've got a question from Bear, and she's 12 years old and learning to be a film composer. My question is, what tips do you have for young people that are learning film scoring like me?
Well, I think it's great that you're into film scoring, and I think getting as much traditional exposure as you can, not just to film music, but to all sorts of music, well-rounded, because often in the film business you're asked to do all kinds of things, and so it's good to have knowledge of a lot of different types of music. And then I think, just playing around with experimenting with sounds and your imagination, and don't really be limited, if you can, by technology.
Yeah,
What do you think, Brandon?
From an inspirational standpoint, I completely agree with Marco. One thing I would suggest, it was the best advice I ever got, was work on finishing a piece. So it's very easy to, even if it's a 1-minute piece, it's a lot easier to come up with an idea and something that inspires you, but it's very hard to finish it. And so maybe my one specific piece of advice would be to practice, no matter how short the piece is, write a piece that has an ending, because it will teach you structure, and it will teach you to get through difficult periods of writing, and everyone has them. Everyone.
That's a great piece of advice, actually. That's really, really good.
But if you get stuck and you walk away from the piece, you're not learning the most important thing that I think our job entails, which is you have to learn to eventually write on a deadline, and push through a piece, even if you're having a bad day. No matter how bad it is, you can always revisit it. But if it's not finished, you don't have a piece. So that's a specific piece of advice. Other than that, I completely agree with Marco about listen to everything you can. And everyone, we're all standing on the shoulders of giants too. Listen to all the old stuff as well as the new stuff.
Now, Lionel Cohenus wants to know from you both, is there an instrument or a genre that you would love to explore but haven't had the right project for yet?
The one thing that really haven't done too much of is romantic comedies. I think we both take ourselves way too seriously, or at least I do. One of my big creative inspirations, is Nino Rota, and the movies that he did for Fellini, are amazing, and I would, that's something that I would love to do. Unfortunately, they don't really make movies like that now. So yeah, that's sort of like a dream, a longing that I don't think will ever be fulfilled.
I'm putting this out there right now. Okay, this is my lot in life. Marco, every Western Marco gets, I'm not on. And I want a Western so bad. So like that show Godless, or I don't know, if I knew someone that had worked on 310 to Yuma, for example, and had been asked to work on it, something like that. But yes, Chaos Walking had Western elements, but I would love a long form Western like that. It would be a dream. I think it would be so cool. But again, I don't know anyone that works on Westerns or hires me on them. So thanks, Marco.
I don't know what you're going to do there, Brandon.
Yeah. I'm literally on the other project when Marco's on a Western. That's just my lot in life. And I've accepted it.
Now, Loki, 1982, speaking of Amazon projects, to Brandon, how did you become involved in Without Remorse, and any plans to have the score album released with some of your incidental music for it?
Sorry, Without Remorse?
Without Remorse. I think it's the new Tom Clancy thing that's coming out.
Yeah, to be honest, I'm not sure what their plans are with it. In terms of a soundtrack, Yonzi was the composer on it, and I was helping out. I would be very shocked if they don't release an album. But I hope they do. I mean, the music turned out great, and the film's actually really good. So I don't know, but let me know if you find out.
Jonesy's just about the last composer I'd even imagine to score a film like that.
Oh yeah, well that was his. I think he said almost verbatim to me was, "I don't know why they hired me, but." So it's he's very aware of that as well.
Now, Gunter Gerlich, will there be a Twilight Zone CD of the Jordan Peele work that you did?
I hope so, man. Yeah,
we're aware of. I don't think so.
Yeah, there's. I wish they did. I don't know. I doubt it as well.
Maybe we'll do a promo CD or something about it.
Yeah, no, hopefully. No, it's interesting because you guys have also, I guess, Marco, when last I saw your incredible hidden location in Malibu, where you almost drive over a cliff to get to. It's like Zan. If a composer had Zan to do as a studio, this is pretty much it. You were actually working on the sequel to Venom, and without doing any spoilers about what we know beyond Woody Harrelson showing up in it. What was that whole experience like? With what you can talk about working on it.
It was a great experience. Went so smooth. That was pretty much a COVID project. Everything was pretty remote. I started on it. It was, just when COVID started, like a year ago, January. And we would send music over to let's see, how did the system work? We sent it to our music editor, Jim Schultz, who then would send it around for the studio to hear and for everyone to hear. And the process went really smooth. And we recorded again. That was another remote recording, but it all went well.
Now I want to, I guess, jump back into your filmography. I'm just the biggest fan of Underwater. I love the whole '80s run of Deep Star 6, Leviathan, The Abyss, and to me this is probably maybe even the best of the genre by obviously updating it and redoing it with the effects technology. And it's amazing. It was even shot underwater. That's essentially all fake. But again, the music is such a huge part of that, of the suspense of that film. How it captured, I guess, how do you capture water and how do you capture depth?
We had a very early chat after seeing a very long chat after seeing the first cut of it, where we realized the entire low end spectrum was gone, because if you're underwater, everything sounds like you have a sub going at all times. So the first thing that Marco and I talked about was, what the heck are we going to do in terms of having an action / horror film with no low end? And so that was when he and I talked about this concept of using this like a binaural microphone, and then the two of us and Buck Sanders came up with this idea of having three sopranos basically walk around it singing and creating these eerie tones, while also creating this idea of kind of movement. And then from that, we just filled in frequencies with where we could. But for the most part, it was very challenging, because an action score with no low end is, you've had your legs cut out from you before you even started.
What did you think, Marco, about the process and the challenge of doing underwater?
I remember it being a challenge. If Brandon didn't mention that, I might not have remembered that, but that's true. We worked a lot with. I remember the first thing we worked with was some vocalists. But I have to listen to the score. I've taken too much Ambien for you to put me on the spot like this and answer.
One really interesting thing about both Underwater and Chaos Walking is that the scores have like a lot of different elements, but again, being a big orchestral fan, and especially in terms of how you use the orchestra, Marco, is when you bring in orchestral music, because it has such a kind of real kick and an energy. It's like, oh my God, there's an orchestra now. I mean, how do you decide, especially in textural films like Underwater and Chaos Walking, as to when to bring in the orchestra?
Well, a lot of it, in terms of orchestra gives a different scope to the picture. You can do a lot of things that are intimate and have a lot of visceral impact with electronic stuff. In terms of emotive, it often lies in the domain of acoustical instruments, I think, and also when you're trying to set up the scope. Some of these shots in Underwater, they're fairly grand, and there's nothing like the orchestra to supply that sort of scope.
I mean, especially in Chaos. I mean, I guess, Brandon, especially in Chaos Walking, when the orchestra does come in.
Yeah, I think with Chaos Walking and Underwater, in both circumstances, I don't know if I would say that the orchestra was the leading.
Not at all, really.
Yeah, so when you're very diplomatic about when you need it, because when it comes in, it's a whole lot of power. So I think where you don't, I think I like, for example, I used to have the orchestra come in right away, and even if you're just holding like a string pad, and I think it's a huge detriment, because if you hold off as long as you can and bring them in when you need it, it has so much more of an effect, in my opinion. Obviously, certain scores are different. There's scores that are completely led by the orchestra, in which it's all about the thematic material. But in the case of both of those scores you're mentioning, a lot of it was process sounds and synths and all these other things, holding off as long as you could until you brought in the orchestra for that extra beef. And then like Marco's saying, and for the emotive scenes, the sensitive scenes, it has so much of an effect.
Now, Dale and Louie, and actually there are a lot of people who are huge fans of World War Z, to keep, threatening to have a sequel, which seems forever if it's ever going to get done. But Dale asked, you mentioned in interviews that World War Z had two totally different scores, the unused one being much scarier. Do you think that'll ever get released? And what was just that whole process like? What did you think of the original, I guess, ending of the first one that took place in Russia, from what I read?
Yeah, I mean, it was a tough process, because there was different pressures on coming at us, and on the picture itself, there was this idea that the movie should be what it was in our movie and live up to that. But then there was also pressure that this had to be a PG-13 movie. And so there were different forces at work, and it influenced how we were scoring it, because there were different cuts and there were different masters that we were serving on it. So not being able to get everybody in a room together to decide together on what was best, it became quickly evident that we had to, the only way to make everybody happy was to write the music that everybody wanted to hear, and that meant writing 2 different scores. So we kept a lot of consistencies so that on the dub stage to be able to mix and match and have that fight that could have taken place in the studio, but postponed to the mixing stage. But what we ended up doing was we were recording one score at Abbey Road, and then we were recording another at
British Grove.
British Grove.
Yeah.
Down the road in London, and I think what happened is, when there's not going to be 2 releases of scores. What ended up happening is it became a hybrid of both, which is exactly what we thought would happen. And that's what exists in the movie and on the soundtrack.
Well, I mean, you must be, it's certainly not the first movie you've been through that has had changes. But when you look at it, though, do you think actually the score can become better? That you suddenly have to rethink, for really any project, that you have to kind of rethink your perception as to how you were originally going to approach it?
No, not really.
I would argue the motivation. It's if the motivation of the changes comes from a place of, let's say, people not agreeing on what the score should be, versus it coming from the motivation of trying to push the composer more. I think that has a fundamental difference on changes, if that makes sense. In other words, you're either diluting a score or you're making it more hardcore, more adventurous, and those are 2 fundamentally different ways to approach notes or changes. Or
I mean, if it's a creative adventure that you're going on with a director, and you're following a creative path, that's great, and that's what we all got into this business for. It's a collaborative business to begin with, but oftentimes it's not for that reason.
So I guess before we wrap up our show, do you think, even though obviously Corona and the lockdown has just been pretty awful for everybody, but in a way, though, do you think it's kind of pushed the creativity of yourselves as composers? And do you think now that we're really kind of coming out of that light in the tunnel in terms of, being able to do, orchestral performances that are pretty seamless from what you would have gotten before this whole horrible thing happened?
Just speaking for myself, a lot of people might disagree with me, but I feel very little benefit has come out of it creatively, because the sad thing I realized after maybe a month into the lockdown was how little my life had changed in terms of my daily life, because we spend so much time in seclusion. And so the thing, other than lives being lost, is just from our careers, was we lost that ability to be in a room with musicians, and even if it's soloists, even if it's not a big orchestra, and or even Marco and I being in the same room and trying stuff out, or having experimental sessions or whatever, that was all gone. And to me, that's part of the whole job I enjoy the most. And that's not even taking into account just being in the same room with a director sometimes. So again, everyone's had their own experience. My experience was there was little to no creative benefit, and it was probably a lot of things lost, experiences lost. But Marco might have a different opinion.
I found the year pretty depressing and anxiety provoking, and for those reasons that Brandon mentioned. You know, I did take some time and work on some of my own projects as well, non-film related. And so I don't feel like creatively it was a total waste. I probably wouldn't have been able to do that in an ordinary year. But on the whole, it's the thing with music is that it needs to be played not in isolation. It's not, we spend a lot of time, as Brandon said, in isolation. So I think music is an essential business.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, I mean, and not to end on the down note, but on my up note, I personally, think Chaos Walking is certainly one of your most creative scores together. Especially again, just given the challenges of the actual story itself and cutting through the noise, and the way you've done it is really interesting and unique, and really ear catching in its way.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Well, cool. They're in agreement. Well, Marco and Brandon, I want to thank you so much for joining us at Film Music Live. I want you all to watch Chaos Walking on video on demand with Marco Beltrami and Brandon Roberts' soundtrack available on Milan Records. And thanks to our producer, Dale Turner, Kathy Ing, Mark Northam, and Jamie Bertel, Jishi Shemaradon, and Stefan Carrere at Milan Records. And I will see you on the next episode of Film Music Live. Bye, everybody.
All right.
Bye.